Montana Territory, 1878. The untamed frontier stretched before Quinn Zimmerman like an endless promise, all golden prairie grass and rugged mountains. At 26, he had the easy confidence of a man who'd found his place in the world, though that world was little more than open range, campfires under starlit skies, and the steady rhythm of cattle drives. The weathered brim of his Stetson shadowed eyes as clear blue as a mountain lake, and his lean frame carried the strength earned through years of hard work rather than idle pursuit. Quinn believed one simple truth about life on the frontier. A man survived by keeping to himself. Trust was a luxury afforded to those in civilized places, not the wild territory where a moment's distraction could cost everything. His parents' deaths at the hands of raiders when he was just 17 had cemented this belief. Since then, he'd kept his relationships brief and his attachments minimal. The Rocking Z Ranch was his only commitment, a modest spread he'd built from nothing, with 5 loyal ranch hands and a growing herd that represented every dollar he'd ever earned. "You heading into town, boss?" called Hank, the oldest of his hands, a grizzled man with experience etched into every line of his face. Quinn nodded, adjusting his saddle on his chestnut gelding. "Supply run. Thought I'd check the mail, see if that fence wire's come in." "Take your time, we got things handled here." Hank's knowing smile suggested he understood Quinn's occasional need for something beyond endless prairie. The town of Cottonwood Springs had grown considerably in recent years. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a proper main street with a hotel, general store, and the newly constructed Silver Dollar Saloon. Quinn tethered his horse outside Pearson's general store, acknowledging the shopkeeper with a nod as he entered. "Quinn Zimmerman, been a while," Mr. Pearson said cheerfully. "Your wire came in last week." "Was beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten." "Been busy with the spring calves," Quinn replied, inspecting the coils of barbed wire. "I'll take these and whatever mail might have come for the ranch." As Quinn gathered his supplies, the door opened with a gentle chime. He barely glanced up until a soft voice carried through the store, a voice that seemed out of place in the rough frontier town, cultured and gentle. "Do you carry writing paper?" "The good kind with proper weight to it." Quinn looked up and felt something shift in his carefully ordered world. Standing at the counter was a young woman he'd never seen before. Her chestnut hair was gathered in a practical but becoming arrangement, with a few tendrils escaping to frame a face that belonged in one of those Eastern paintings. She wore a blue calico dress, simple by city standards perhaps, but well-made and flattering to her slender figure. She couldn't have been more than 22, yet she carried herself with the self-possession of someone older. "We've got some that came in from Denver," Mr. Pearson was saying. "Not as fine as what you might find back east, Miss Valenti, but the best in the territory." Quinn found himself lingering, pretending interest in a display of tobacco. There was something about her that commanded attention, not flashy like the saloon girls, but a quiet dignity that seemed to transform the dusty store into somewhere finer. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded politely and turned away, discomfited by his own interest. Quinn Zimmerman didn't gawk at ladies in general stores. He had built his life around self-sufficiency, and allowing himself to be distracted by a pretty face was the first step toward the kind of vulnerability he couldn't afford. Outside, Quinn loaded his supplies onto his horse when a commotion down the street caught his attention. 3 riders, clearly trail-worn and rough-looking, were dismounting in front of the saloon. Something about their watchful posture set off warnings in his mind. These weren't cowhands looking for entertainment, but men who carried trouble with them. The store door opened behind him, and the young woman, Miss Valenti, Pearson had called her, emerged into the afternoon sunlight. She noticed the newcomers and froze, her package of paper clutched tightly against her chest. In that moment, all color drained from her face. "Miss, are you all right?" Quinn found himself asking, surprising himself with his concern. She startled at his voice. "Yes, the sun is quite strong today," but her eyes never left the 3 men, who fortunately had already disappeared into the saloon. "Allow me to escort you wherever you're headed," Quinn offered, again shocking himself with the impulse. "These streets can get rowdy with newcomers in town." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, Quinn Zimmerman. I have the ranch north of town." "Cassandra Valenti, I'm staying with my aunt, Mrs. Abernathy, at the millinery shop." She indicated a small storefront further down the street. As they walked, Quinn found himself unusually tongue-tied. He was not a man given to idle conversation, especially with women he'd just met, yet something about Cassandra's evident distress awakened protective instincts he'd long suppressed. "Are you new to Cottonwood Springs?" he asked finally. "Yes, I arrived from St. Louis 2 weeks ago." Her voice was steady now, though her eyes occasionally darted toward the saloon. "My aunt needed assistance with her shop after her husband passed." "My condolences for your family's loss." "Thank you. Though I never met my uncle, I'm told he was a good man." She paused at the millinery shop door. "Thank you for your escort, Mr. Zimmerman." "Quinn," he corrected automatically. She smiled then, transforming her face from merely beautiful to something that caught at his chest in a way he couldn't explain. "Quinn, then. Perhaps I'll see you again." "Perhaps," he agreed, tipping his hat before turning back toward his horse. Quinn couldn't explain the lightness in his step as he completed his errands, nor the inexplicable urge to look presentable before entering the saloon for a quick drink. He told himself he was simply checking on those rough-looking strangers, assessing any potential threat to the town. The three men sat in a corner, speaking in hushed tones. One, a dark-haired man with a scar running from eye to jaw, seemed to be giving instructions to the others. Quinn settled at the bar, nursing a whiskey and keeping his ears open. "The boss won't wait forever," the scarred man was saying. "Either we find her or we go back empty-handed, and I ain't keen on facing him empty-handed." The mention of her raised the hair on Quinn's neck. Coincidence, he told himself. Plenty of reasons three men might be looking for a woman. When Quinn finally rode back to his ranch, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Despite the beauty, his thoughts kept returning to Cassandra Valenti's face when she'd spotted those men, pure fear, quickly masked but unmistakable. Quinn had spent nearly a decade avoiding entanglements, keeping his world simple and secure. Yet as he unsaddled his horse in the gathering dusk, he found himself wondering when he might have reason to return to town. 2 days later, that reason presented itself when his youngest ranch hand, Danny, took a fall and gashed his arm badly enough to need stitching. Quinn rode with him into Cottonwood Springs to see the doctor, and if his gaze lingered on the millinery shop as they passed, he refused to acknowledge it. While Danny was being tended to, Quinn found himself wandering toward the small creek that ran behind the town. He rounded a bend in the path and stopped short. Seated on a flat rock by the water's edge was Cassandra, a sketch pad balanced on her knee, her attention fixed on a blue jay perched on a nearby branch. He started to retreat, not wanting to disturb her, when a twig snapped beneath his boot. The bird flew off in alarm, and Cassandra turned quickly, her hand instinctively covering her drawing. "Mr. Zimmerman, Quinn," she corrected herself with a small smile. "You startled me." "My apologies," he said, removing his hat. "I didn't mean to interrupt your art." She looked down at her sketch pad, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Hardly art, just a way to pass the time." "May I?" He gestured toward the space beside her on the rock. She hesitated, then nodded, shifting to make room. Quinn settled beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Are you enjoying our little town?" he asked, searching for safe conversation. "It's quieter than St. Louis," she replied, "but there's a certain beauty to it." She glanced at him. "What brings you to town today?" One of my hands needed the doctor, nothing too serious. He found himself studying her profile, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees to dance across her features. "Those men at the saloon the other day, did you know them?" The question slipped out before he could consider its propriety. Cassandra stiffened slightly. "No," she said too quickly. "Why would you think that?" "You seemed concerned when you saw them." She closed her sketch pad. "Mr. Zimmerman, while I appreciate your escort the other day, my concerns are my own." The rebuke was gentle but firm. Quinn nodded, accepting the boundary. "Of course." "My apologies." They sat in silence for a moment before Cassandra spoke again, her voice softer. "Have you lived here long? In Montana Territory, I mean." "Since I was 18, he answered, grateful for the shift in topic. "Came west with nothing but a horse and my father's old rifle. Worked cattle drives until I saved enough for my own place." "That's quite an accomplishment." There was genuine admiration in her tone, building something from nothing. "The Rocking Z is small compared to some spreads, but it's mine." "No debts, no partners." He couldn't keep the pride from his voice. "What about you? Will you stay here long?" A shadow passed across her face. "I'm not certain. It depends on how things unfold." Before Quinn could ask what she meant, voices approached along the path. Cassandra quickly gathered her things, rising with a fluid grace. "I should get back to the shop. Aunt Martha will wonder where I've gone." "May I walk with you?" Quinn offered, rising as well. She seemed about to refuse, then glanced toward the approaching voices and nodded. "Thank you." As they walked, Quinn found himself sharing stories of ranch life. The spring roundup, breaking horses, the satisfaction of watching a calf grow strong under his care. Cassandra listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a quick intelligence beneath her gentle demeanor. At the millinery shop door she paused. "Would you? That is, my aunt always cooks too much for Sunday dinner. Perhaps you might join us tomorrow after church services." Quinn was agreeing before he'd even considered it, something warm unfurling in his chest at her invitation. It was only later, riding back to the rocking Z with Danny, that he questioned his own eagerness. Sunday dinner meant putting on his good clothes, making small talk, behaving like a man with social graces rather than one more comfortable with cattle than people. Yet the thought of seeing Cassandra again overrode his misgivings. This, he told himself, was merely neighborliness, what any decent man would do for newcomers to town. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Quinn found himself oddly nervous as he shaved carefully, donned his best shirt, and rode into town. The church service passed in a blur, his attention fixed on the slender figure in a pale yellow dress several pews ahead. Dinner at Mrs. Abernathy's modest home behind the millinery shop was a revelation. The elderly woman was a splendid cook and a natural conversationalist who drew Quinn out of his usual reserve. Cassandra was different here, more relaxed, laughing at her aunt's stories, her eyes bright with an inner light that transformed her from merely beautiful to luminous. "Tell us more about your ranch, Mr. Zimmerman," Mrs. Abernathy urged as she served apple pie. "Cassie tells me you've built it all yourself." "Cassie?" Quinn raised an eyebrow, smiling at Cassandra's slight blush. "Only my aunt calls me that," she said quickly, "since I was small." "It suits you," he replied, then turned to Mrs. Abernathy. "The ranch keeps me busy. 5 hands besides myself, nearly 200 head of cattle now. We're small, but growing steadily." "No Mrs. Zimmerman to help manage things?" the older woman asked with the directness of her generation. "Aunt Martha," Cassandra's blush deepened. Quinn shook his head, smiling to ease Cassandra's embarrassment. "No, ma'am, never seemed to find the time for courting." "HMPH, a handsome young man like you should make time," Mrs. Abernathy declared. "Life's too short for nothing but work." The conversation shifted to safer topics, but Quinn found himself watching Cassandra with new awareness. What would it be like to have someone like her to return home to? Someone whose smile could light up a room, whose quick mind and gentle manner created a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. Such thoughts were dangerous, he reminded himself. A man alone answered to no one, risked nothing, lost nothing. Yet as the afternoon lengthened into evening, Quinn found himself lingering, reluctant to return to the empty ranch house. "I could show you the area sometime," he offered as he prepared to leave. "The foothills are beautiful this time of year." Cassandra glanced at her aunt, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Saturday, I could bring a wagon, pack a proper picnic." The smile she gave him was worth every moment of discomfort his uncharacteristic boldness had cost him. "Saturday would be perfect." The week crawled by. Quinn found himself making unnecessary trips to town, always finding some excuse to pass the millinery shop. Twice he caught glimpses of Cassandra through the window, and once she stepped outside just as he was passing, leading to a brief, sweet conversation that left him smiling all the way back to the ranch. His hands noticed the change in him. "Boss seems different lately," he overheard Hank saying to the others. "Almost caught him whistling yesterday." "Must be that pretty Miss Valenti from town," Danny replied with a grin. "Seen him riding past the millinery more times this week than in the 5 years before." Quinn pretended not to hear, but couldn't deny the truth of it. Something was changing inside him, some frozen part thawing despite all his efforts to maintain the careful distance that had protected him for so long. Saturday dawned with the promise of perfect weather. Quinn was up before sunrise, ensuring the wagon was spotless, the team groomed to a shine. He packed a basket with the best his modest kitchen could offer, supplemented by fresh bread and preserves from the general store. When he pulled up in front of the millinery shop, Cassandra was waiting. She wore a simple blue riding skirt and white blouse, her chestnut hair partially covered by a practical bonnet. Something about seeing her dressed for a day in the countryside rather than town attire made his heart skip. "You look," Quinn searched for the right word as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "Ready for adventure," she supplied with a smile. "Beautiful," he corrected, "but ready for adventure works too." They headed north out of town, the wagon following a trail that wound through meadows brilliant with spring wildflowers. Cassandra proved to be good company, neither too talkative nor too quiet, expressing genuine interest in the landscape and the work of ranching. Quinn found himself sharing stories he rarely told, about his parents, their small farm in Missouri, the raid that had left him orphaned and determined to make his own way far from memories too painful to revisit daily. "Is that why you came west?" Cassandra asked gently, "to escape those memories?" Quinn considered this as they crested a rise overlooking a small lake nestled among pine trees. "Partly," he admitted, "but also to build something that was entirely my own, something no one could take from me." He pulled the wagon to a halt in a shady spot overlooking the water. "This seems like a good place for that picnic." As Quinn spread a blanket on the grass, Cassandra wandered to the edge of the lake, gazing out at the mountains reflected in its still surface. "It's breathtaking," she said when he joined her. "So vast and untamed, I understand now why you love it here." "And you?" Quinn asked, suddenly curious about the life she'd left behind. "Do you miss St. Louis?" A shadow crossed her face. "Parts of it, but there were complications, things I needed to leave behind." "Those men in town," Quinn said slowly, "the ones you reacted to, were they part of those complications?" Cassandra's shoulders tensed. For a moment he thought she might refuse to answer, but then she sighed. "You're very observant, Quinn Zimmerman. Comes with ranching, you learn to notice details others might miss." She turned to face him fully, something resolute in her expression. "If we're to be friends, there are things you should know about me, things that might change how you see me." "Try me," he said simply. Cassandra took a deep breath. "My father, he wasn't the man I believed him to be growing up. After my mother died when I was 16, I learned he was involved in things that were not legal, robbery primarily, banks, stagecoaches." She looked away. "I left as soon as I could, came to my aunt's. Started over." Quinn absorbed this information. "You're not responsible for your father's choices." "No," she agreed, "but his world has a way of following me. Those men in town, they work for him. He wants me to come back to be part of his business." Her voice grew bitter. "He calls it a family enterprise." Understanding dawned. "You're hiding from him." "Not very successfully, it seems." Cassandra's fingers twisted together nervously. "I should have gone further, changed my name completely." "Why didn't you?" Her smile was sad. "Aunt Martha is my mother's sister. She's my only link to the life I had before I understood what my father was. The only family I have left who represents something good." Quinn reached out, hesitating only briefly before taking her hand. "Your secret's safe with me, Cassandra." She looked up at him, vulnerability and hope mingling in her gaze. "Most men would run the other direction from an outlaw's daughter." "I'm not most men," Quinn said, surprising himself with his certainty. "And you're not just an outlaw's daughter. You're Cassandra Valenti, who sketches birds and helps her aunt in the millinery shop and sees beauty in a wild landscape." Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forming that transcended the short time they'd known each other. When they finally returned to their picnic blanket, the conversation flowed more easily, unburdened by secrets. They spent the afternoon exploring the lakeshore, skipping stones across the water, and talking of everything and nothing. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Quinn found himself reluctant to end their day. "There's a social next Saturday," he said as they packed the wagon. "A barn dance at the Peterson place, would you?" "That is, might I escort you?" Cassandra's smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." The week that followed was the strangest of Quinn's life. He found himself distracted, his thoughts constantly returning to Cassandra, her laugh, the way sunlight caught in her hair, the courage it had taken to leave everything familiar to escape her father's influence. His men noticed his preoccupation, but were wise enough to limit their teasing to good-natured remarks about his suddenly frequent trips to town. Even Hank, normally the most vocal, seemed pleased by the change in Quinn's demeanor. "About time you found something besides cattle to occupy your thoughts," the older man observed one evening as they checked the herd. "Getting worried you'd turn into a hermit like old Jeremiah up in the hills." Quinn merely shook his head, unwilling to examine too closely the feelings taking root in his chest. Caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was dangerous. Hadn't his parents' deaths taught him that? Yet each time he saw Cassandra, that carefully constructed belief wavered a little more. The night of the social arrived clear and warm. Quinn wore his best clothes and even submitted to a proper haircut in town that morning. When he arrived at Mrs. Abernathy's home, his breath caught at the sight of Cassandra in a dress of deep green that highlighted the rich chestnut of her hair and the clarity of her hazel eyes. "You look," words failed him for a moment, "I've never seen anyone so beautiful." She blushed, the color enhancing her already considerable loveliness. "Thank you, you're quite handsome yourself." Mrs. Abernathy beamed at them both. "Now don't keep her out too late, Mr. Zimmerman, though I trust you'll take good care of my niece." "Yes, ma'am," Quinn promised solemnly. She couldn't be safer. The Peterson barn had been transformed with lanterns and bunting, a makeshift dance floor created in the center where couples were already moving to the lively music of fiddles and a piano. Quinn was not much of a dancer, but for Cassandra he was willing to attempt anything. She laughed as he led her through a somewhat clumsy Virginia reel, her hand warm in his, her eyes bright with enjoyment. When the music slowed, he hesitantly drew her closer for a waltz, his heart pounding at her nearness. "I'm afraid I'm not very practiced at this," he admitted. "You're doing wonderfully," she assured him, following his lead with natural grace. "Besides, it's not about the steps, it's about the company." As they moved together, something shifted in Quinn's chest, a final wall crumbling, a truth he could no longer deny. This woman, in just a few short weeks, had become more important to him than the careful isolation he'd maintained for years. Later, as they stood outside in the cool night air, stars scattered like diamond dust above them, Quinn found the courage to voice what he'd been feeling. "Cassandra, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never met anyone like you, someone who makes me want to be more than just a rancher with his cattle." She looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. "Quinn, let me finish," he said gently. "I've spent most of my life believing that keeping to myself was the only way to be safe, that caring for someone meant risking everything. But these past weeks with you have shown me how empty that kind of safety is." Cassandra's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I feel the same way. You've shown me that my father's legacy doesn't have to define my future." Quinn took her hands in his. "Whatever comes, whoever might come looking for you, we'll face it together, if you'll have me." "Are you certain?" she whispered. "My father is not a man who gives up easily. Being with me could bring danger to your door." "Some things are worth the risk," he replied, leaning down to brush his lips against hers in a kiss as gentle as a promise. When they parted, Cassandra's smile was luminous. "I never expected to find someone like you here, Quinn Zimmerman, someone who could see past where I came from to who I truly am." "And who is that?" he asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Someone who wants a quiet life, a home filled with love, a place to belong." She leaned into his touch. "Someone who thinks she might be falling in love with a certain stubborn rancher." Quinn's heart soared at her words. "Then we want the same things." As they returned to the dance, Quinn felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time since his parents' deaths, he could envision a future that included more than solitary nights and endless work, a future with Cassandra by his side, building something together that neither could create alone. The following weeks passed in a blur of joy for Quinn. He courted Cassandra properly, with Mrs. Abernathy's approving eye always ensuring propriety. Sunday dinners became a cherished ritual, as did evening walks along the creek behind town. When ranch work allowed, Quinn would ride in to escort Cassandra to church or a town gathering, gradually introducing her to the community that had been his only family for years. Each meeting deepened their connection, revealing new facets to admire. Quinn discovered Cassandra's quiet determination, her quick wit, her passionate defense of those she cared for. She in turn learned of his unwavering loyalty, his gentle way with animals, his hidden capacity for tenderness that few had ever glimpsed. Yet beneath their growing happiness ran a current of unease. Twice more strangers had passed through town asking questions about new arrivals. Though they never stayed long, each appearance left Cassandra tense and watchful. "They'll keep coming," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch of Mrs. Abernathy's home. "My father is not a man who accepts defeat." Quinn took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "What can you tell me about him? The more I know, the better prepared we can be." Cassandra sighed, the weight of her past evident in her slumped shoulders. "His name is Victor Valenti. He calls himself a businessman, but his business is taking what isn't his. He has men working for him across 3 states, Missouri, Kansas, now reaching into the territories. And he wants you back because I know things. Names, hideouts, plans for jobs that were in the works when I left." She looked at him directly. "And because in his own twisted way he loves me, I'm his daughter, his legacy. The only family he has left since my mother died." Quinn considered this information carefully. Has he ever hurt you, physically, I mean? No, Cassandra answered without hesitation. Never, but he's hurt others, ordered it done. That's why I had to leave. I couldn't bear being part of it any longer, even on the periphery. We'll figure this out, Quinn promised, together. The solution when it came to him that night was both simple and terrifying. If Cassandra was truly to have a fresh start, to be free of her father's shadow, they needed to face the threat directly rather than waiting for it to find them. The next morning, Quinn rode to town before dawn, a plan forming in his mind. His first stop was the sheriff's office, where he had a long, private conversation with Sheriff Taylor, a man he'd known and respected for years. From there, he went to the telegraph office, sending messages to contacts in law enforcement he'd made during his cattle-driving days. When he finally arrived at the millinery shop, his resolve was set. Cassandra greeted him with a smile that faltered when she saw his serious expression. "What is it?" she asked, leading him to the small sitting room in back. "I have a proposal," Quinn said, taking her hands in his. "One that requires your complete trust." "You have it," she said without hesitation. "We're going to send a message to your father." He squeezed her hands gently when she stiffened, "Not directly. But word will reach him that you're here, that you're planning to marry." "Marry?" Cassandra's eyes widened. "Quinn, what are you saying?" He dropped to one knee, his heart pounding. This wasn't how he'd planned to propose. He'd imagined something more romantic, perhaps at sunset by the lake where they'd had their first picnic. But urgency overrode sentiment. "Cassandra Valenti, I love you. I want to spend my life with you, build a home and a family together. Will you marry me?" He paused, then added, "Not just because of this situation with your father, but because I can't imagine my future without you in it." Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Quinn, but I don't understand how this helps with my father." Quinn rose, drawing her into his arms. "We'll draw him out on our terms. Sheriff Taylor knows the whole story now, about your father, about you leaving. He's contacted the federal marshal's office. They've been building a case against Victor Valenti for years but could never get enough evidence. And I can provide that evidence," Cassandra realized, pulling back to look at him. "Names, dates, locations." "Only if you're willing," Quinn stressed. "This has to be your choice." She was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she nodded. "My father gave me no choice when he pulled me into his world after my mother died. Now I'm making my own choice, to stop running, to build a life with you that isn't shadowed by fear." Her voice strengthened. "I'll do it." The plan was set in motion that very day. Announcements of their engagement were posted at the general store and saloon. Quinn arranged for a notice to run in the territorial newspaper. Sheriff Taylor quietly brought in additional deputies, men who could blend in with the town's regular population while maintaining vigilance. Mrs. Abernathy threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm, insisting they would not let fear dictate their happiness. The ceremony was set for just 3 weeks away, soon enough to maintain momentum in their plan, yet allowing time for proper arrangements. "You should know," Quinn told Cassandra as they walked arm in arm through town one afternoon, deliberately visible, "once we're married, you'll be moving to the ranch. I've already started expanding the house, added a proper sitting room, a larger kitchen." She looked up at him with a smile that warmed him to his core. "You were that certain I'd say yes." "Hopeful," he corrected. "A man can dream." "Tell me more about these improvements," she encouraged, leaning into his side. As Quinn described his plans for their home, a garden plot for Cassandra, bookshelves for the volumes she loved, wide windows to capture the mountain view, he felt her relax against him. For these precious moments, they were simply a couple planning their future, not participants in a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The danger was never far from mind, however. 4 days before the wedding, a stranger arrived in town, a well-dressed man who checked into the hotel and began asking casual questions about recent arrivals and upcoming events. When description of the man reached Quinn through Sheriff Taylor, his gut tightened with certainty. Victor Valenti had come for his daughter personally. "Are you certain it's him?" Cassandra asked that evening, her face pale as they sat in Mrs. Abernathy's parlor. "Matches the description you gave," Quinn confirmed. "Well-dressed, silver at his temples, walks with a cane though he doesn't seem to need it." "That's him," her voice was barely a whisper. "He always said the cane was a gentleman's accessory, but I know he keeps a blade hidden in it." Quinn exchanged a glance with Sheriff Taylor, who had joined them. "We need to move up our timeline," the lawman said. He's here sooner than expected and alone so far, which suggests his men might be positioned nearby. What do you propose, Mrs. Abernathy asked, her normally cheerful face set in determined lines. She had proven remarkably steadfast upon learning of her brother-in-law's true nature. The wedding was to be at the church on Saturday, Quinn said slowly, an idea forming. What if we let it be known we've moved it up? A small ceremony tomorrow at sunset, just family and close friends. The perfect opportunity for Valenti to make his move, Sheriff Taylor nodded. We'll have men positioned all around, but it needs to appear unguarded, vulnerable. Cassandra's hand found Quinn's, her grip tight. Using our wedding as bait, she said, her voice stronger now. It could work. Only if you're sure, Quinn insisted. We could find another way. She shook her head. No, it's time to end this. I want to marry you, Quinn Zimmerman, and begin our life together without this shadow hanging over us. The plan was set in motion immediately. Sheriff Taylor departed to coordinate with his deputies and the federal marshal who had arrived secretly the day before. Mrs. Abernathy bustled about, muttering about adjustments to the wedding arrangements. Left alone briefly, Quinn drew Cassandra into his arms. I'm sorry, he said against her hair. This isn't how our wedding day should be. She looked up at him, something fierce and resolute in her gaze. Our life together will be what we make it, starting now. I refuse to let my father steal one more moment of happiness from us. The next day passed in a blur of preparation, both for the wedding and for the confrontation they knew would come. Quinn spent the morning at the ranch, giving instructions to his hands about security, then rode back to town where he met with Sheriff Taylor to review final details. By late afternoon, word had spread through Cottonwood Springs of the hastily arranged ceremony. The small church was decorated simply with wildflowers. The minister prepared and select guests, those trusted by Quinn and vetted by the sheriff, invited to attend. Quinn stood in a side room of the church, adjusting his string tie and trying to calm his racing heart. This should have been simple nerves about marrying the woman he loved. Instead, his mind was divided between anticipation of making Cassandra his wife and vigilance against the threat that loomed. A knock at the door preceded Hank's entrance. The older man had insisted on standing with Quinn during the ceremony. Everything's set, boss. Deputies positioned all around, looking casual-like. No sign of our expected guest yet. He'll come, Quinn said with certainty. A man like that doesn't let go easily. You sure about all this? Hank asked, concern evident in his weathered face. Marrying her, I mean, given who her father is. Quinn's answer was immediate and firm. I've never been more sure of anything. Cassandra is nothing like her father. She's brave, kind, honest, everything good in this world. Hank nodded, apparently satisfied. Then let's get you married, son. The small church was filled with warm light from the setting sun as Quinn took his place at the altar. The handful of guests, his ranch hands, Mrs. Abernathy, the doctor and his wife, a few townspeople who had become friends, watched with varying degrees of awareness about the true nature of the event. When the door opened and Cassandra appeared on Sheriff Taylor's arm, a last-minute substitution that placed the lawman in a central position, Quinn forgot everything else. She wore a simple white dress, her chestnut hair adorned with tiny white flowers. Her face, as she walked toward him, held such love and trust that Quinn's throat tightened with emotion. The ceremony began with traditional words, the minister's voice steady as he spoke of commitment and fidelity. Quinn barely heard him, lost in Cassandra's eyes as they exchanged vows that, despite the circumstances, were as sincere as any ever spoken in that church. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister concluded. You may kiss your bride. As Quinn leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, the church doors burst open. 3 men strode in, led by a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver-streaked hair and a walking stick. My apologies for the interruption, Victor Valenti said, his voice cultured and pleasant despite the menace in his stance. But I believe I have a right to witness my daughter's wedding. The church erupted in confusion. Several guests rose from their seats only to freeze as Valenti's companions drew weapons. Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, his hand moving toward his own gun. Now, Valenti chided, let's keep this civilized. I'm merely a father come to give his blessing. His eyes found Cassandra, who stood straight-backed beside Quinn, though I would have appreciated an invitation, daughter. You lost the right to be part of my life when you tried to make me part of your criminal enterprise, Cassandra replied, her voice remarkably steady. Please leave, father, this is my wedding day. Valenti's pleasant expression hardened. I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, you possess information that could be quite damaging to my business interests. I've been very patient allowing you this little adventure, but it's time to come home now. Quinn moved slightly, positioning himself between Cassandra and her father. She is home, he said firmly. She's my wife now. How touching, Valenti sneered. The rancher and the outlaw's daughter, a frontier romance for the ages. Unfortunately, it ends today. He made a subtle gesture to his men. Take her, kill anyone who interferes. What happened next was a blur of movement and sound. Sheriff Taylor and two deputies who had been disguised as wedding guests drew their weapons. Hank and Quinn's other hands moved to protect the civilians. Quinn pushed Cassandra behind him, reaching for the gun hidden beneath his jacket. Federal Marshal, a voice boomed from the back of the church. Everyone down. Gunfire erupted, shattering the stained glass window and sending splinters flying from the wooden pews. Quinn pulled Cassandra to the floor, covering her body with his as chaos reigned around them. When the shooting stopped, an eerie silence fell over the church. Quinn raised his head cautiously to survey the scene. One of Valenti's men lay motionless near the door. Another was being handcuffed by a deputy. Victor Valenti himself was on his knees, a federal marshal standing over him, blood spreading across the outlaw's expensive suit from a shoulder wound. Are you hurt? Quinn asked Cassandra urgently, helping her to sit up. She shook her head, her face pale but composed. No, you. I'm fine. He helped her to her feet, keeping an arm protectively around her waist as they faced her father. Valenti's eyes burned with fury as he looked at them. You set me up, he spat at Cassandra, my own daughter. You gave me no choice, she replied, her voice gaining strength. You taught me family is everything, then tried to make me complicit in hurting other families. Did you think I wouldn't eventually see the truth? The marshal jerked Valenti to his feet. Victor Valenti, you're under arrest for multiple counts of robbery, conspiracy, and assault. We've rounded up your men waiting outside town as well. As they led him past Quinn and Cassandra, Valenti paused. For a moment, something like regret flickered across his face. You have your mother's conscience, he said quietly to Cassandra. Too good for this world. Too good for me, then the hardness returned. This isn't over. Yes, Cassandra said firmly, it is. They watched as her father was led away, a strange mixture of emotions passing between them, relief, sorrow, and finally, tentative hope. The minister cleared his throat. Well, he said with remarkable composure for a man who had just witnessed a gunfight in his church, as I was saying before we were interrupted, I now pronounce you husband and wife. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the remaining guests. Quinn turned to Cassandra, searching her face. Are you sure you still want this, want me, after all that's happened? In answer, she reached up, pulling his face down to hers for a kiss that left no doubt about her feelings. The small congregation broke into applause, tension giving way to celebration as the reality of their narrow escape sank in. Later, as they stood outside the church receiving congratulations from friends and townspeople, Sheriff Taylor approached them. Valenti and his men will be transported to federal custody tomorrow, he informed them. The marshal says with Cassandra's testimony and the evidence they've gathered, he won't see freedom again in this lifetime. Will I need to testify in person? Cassandra asked, her hand tight in Quinn's. Written testimony should suffice for now, the sheriff assured her. The marshal will be in touch about details. As the sheriff moved away, Quinn turned to his new wife. Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Zimmerman? The smile that spread across her face was answer enough. They rode to the rocking Z in the wagon Quinn had prepared, arriving as moonlight bathed the ranch house in silver light. The improvements he described were visible even in the darkness. New curtains at the windows, a porch swing, a garden plot marked out and ready for planting. Quinn lifted Cassandra from the wagon and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture after the decidedly untraditional events of their wedding day. Welcome home, he said as he set her gently on her feet in the main room. She turned slowly, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings, the bookshelves he'd built for her, the fresh wildflowers in a vase on the table. It's perfect, she whispered, all of it. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Cassandra traced the line of Quinn's jaw with gentle fingers. I never thought I could have this, she confessed, a real home. A good man who knows all of me and loves me anyway. Not anyway, Quinn corrected, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. Because of who you are, all of you. Your past, your courage in leaving it behind, your determination to build something better. That's what I fell in love with. And what about your belief that a man is safer alone? She asked. That caring means risking everything. Quinn considered this, his arm tightening around her. I was wrong, he said simply. Being alone isn't safety, it's just emptiness dressed up as self-protection. Real safety is this, knowing that whatever comes, we face it together. In the years that followed, the Rocking Z prospered under their combined care. Quinn's cattle operation expanded, and Cassandra added her own touches to their enterprise, a vegetable garden that grew to supply half the town, a small orchard, eventually even a schoolhouse where she taught the children of neighboring ranches alongside their own 2 sons and daughter. Victor Valenti was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, his criminal network dismantled by the evidence Cassandra provided. Though she occasionally received letters from him, she never replied, choosing instead to focus on the family and community she and Quinn were building. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Any regrets? Quinn asked, his arm around her waist. Cassandra leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. Not a single one, she replied, though I sometimes think about how close I came to never knowing this life, if I'd run further if you hadn't been so observant that day in the general store. I think we would have found each other somehow, Quinn said with the certainty of a man who had learned to believe in more than just what he could see and touch. Some things are meant to be. Like an outlaw's daughter and a lone rancher, she teased. Exactly like that, he agreed, turning her in his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future built on truth, trust, and a love strong enough to overcome even the darkest of pasts.